I drove into Benton Ridge on a cool Saturday afternoon, the kind of dry Arizona weather that tricks you into thinking it's pleasant until you step out of the car and your skin starts begging for moisture. I had just wrapped a 2-week field training cycle back at Fort Westlake, and the only thing on my mind was getting home, scrubbing the dust off my uniform, and letting my daughter, Mara, drag me through whatever woodworking project she was excited about. Instead, we were headed straight into my sister's 35th birthday party because apparently, in my family, missing a party is about as serious as desertion. Mara sat beside me in the passenger seat, holding the wooden box she'd spent 3 months building. 3 months. Sanding every corner, fitting the lid, etching tiny flowers on the top, saving her allowance to buy the brass hinges because, in her words, Dia deserves something real, not store stuff. The kid has more heart in her 12-year-old chest than half the adults in my bloodline combined. She kept checking the box like she expected it to fall apart on the drive, which was ironic considering it was sturdier than Janice's life choices. "You think she'll like it?" she asked. I forced a smile. She'd be out of her mind not to. That was the safest answer I could give. The truth was, I didn't trust Janice with anything more fragile than a plastic spoon, but Mara didn't need that speech. Not yet. We pulled up to my parents' house, a faded yellow place that always looked like it was one overdue bill away from collapsing. The driveway was already packed. Janice loved an audience, especially the kind that knew nothing about her actual life but clapped anyway because she brought chips. Mara hopped out the second I parked, clutching the box like treasure. She walked ahead of me through the side gate into the backyard. I followed her in, scanning the crowd the way the Army trained me to entrance points, exits, potential hazards, people most likely to start nonsense. In this case, that last category was basically my whole family. Janice stood at the center of the yard, wearing a short white dress that looked expensive, and probably wasn't, holding a drink that definitely wasn't her first of the day. When she saw us, she gave the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. "Well, look who finally showed," she said. I ignored the tone. Mara didn't notice it anyway. She was glowing. She stepped forward, holding the box up with both hands. "Happy birthday, Aunt Janice. I made this for you." For a second, just a second, I thought Janice might fake gratitude. She liked pretending she was the misunderstood creative genius of the family, the kind who appreciates handmade things. But the second she touched the box, her mouth twisted like she'd picked up a dead rat. "What is this?" she asked, flipping it open. She didn't look at the craftsmanship, the etching, the time, the effort. She looked at the empty velvet lining and sneered, like it personally offended her. Then she laughed. "Cheap, worthless trash." And before I could process the words, before Mara even had time to blink, Janice tossed the box straight into my daughter's face. I heard the crack of the wood. I saw the way Mara's head snapped back, her hand flying up to her cheek. The brass hinge left a thin red line across her skin. The entire yard went quiet, not concerned quiet, but entertained quiet, like everyone was waiting to see what the next episode of the Kroll family circus would be. My parents? They smirked. Honest to God, smirked. My mother nudged my father and whispered something that made him chuckle. In that moment, something in my chest stilled. Not rage, not shock, just clarity. The kind the Army drills into you. Assess the threat, prioritize the mission, act. I knelt beside Mara. She didn't cry. She didn't say a word. She just stared at the broken box in her hands, the one thing she had put love into. Her lip trembled, but she held it together better than most adults in this yard ever had. "You okay?" I asked softly. She nodded, even though she wasn't. I stood up. I felt an entire backyard of eyes on me, most of them expecting a blow-up. They wanted a show. They wanted the dramatic sister fight, the screaming match, the plate throwing. They weren't getting any of it. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I took a picture of Janice's Jeep parked crooked along the curb, the same Jeep I had used as collateral to fund her candle shop. Then I took a picture of the shattered wooden box. Then I opened my banking app, scrolled to the auto-pay line that had been paying my parents' rent every month for 8 years straight, and screenshotted that too. Janice raised an eyebrow. "What, you gonna send that to your Army friends?" I didn't answer her. I didn't answer anyone. I simply opened the family group chat, 43 unread messages about whose casserole was too salty last Thanksgiving, and sent the 3 images with a single line. From today, you're on your own. I hit send. A hush fell over the yard. Not the quiet of respect, the quiet of confusion, of disbelief. Of people realizing the person they'd been using as a financial life raft just sliced the rope. Janice's jaw dropped. You're kidding. You can't be serious. I didn't respond. Mara tugged gently on my sleeve. Mom, can we go home? Yeah, I said. We're done here. We walked out through the side gate. Nobody stopped us. Nobody apologized. Nobody asked if Mara was hurt. The only voice I heard was Janice shouting behind us, her words slurred with anger and entitlement. You can't just walk out. You owe us. I didn't even look back. I didn't need to. For the first time in years, the air felt clear. I opened the car door for Mara, waited until she buckled in, then climbed into the driver's seat myself. As we pulled away, the yard behind us kept shrinking in the rearview mirror until it wasn't part of our vision anymore. Good. It didn't deserve to be. Mara held the cracked box in her lap. She finally spoke, voice small. I'm sorry she didn't like it. Ina. She didn't deserve it, I said. Mara rested her head on the seat. She stayed quiet the whole drive, holding what was left of her gift the way some kids hold stuffed animals. I kept my eyes on the road, the desert stretching ahead of us in long empty miles, the sun dropping toward the horizon. I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel fear. What I felt was the calm that comes when you stop trying to fix something that was never going to work. And that feeling didn't go away as we drove on. The road home blurred past my windshield as the sun dipped low, and the quiet inside the car pressed in the way it always did when something hit Mara harder than she wanted to admit. By the time we stepped into our living room, she went straight to her room with the cracked box, and I stood in the doorway long enough to see her set it on her desk like she was tucking in something wounded. Then I turned away and let the rest of the night swallow itself. The next morning, the house felt steady again. Not peaceful, just steady. The kind of calm you get when you finally accept you're done cleaning up after someone else's mess. I brewed coffee, the good kind I saved for weekends, and sat at the counter scrolling through my banking app. 8 years of transactions stared back at me in neat little lines. 8 years of me paying for things that weren't mine. 8 years of convincing myself I owed people who never thought twice about what they owed me. It didn't start as a burden. Back then, it felt like survival. The first time I took over my parents' rent, Roy had just come home from the hospital after a heart scare. His meds weren't covered by insurance, and Denise had cried in the parking lot, saying they'd figure it out somehow. Somehow always meant me. At the time, I was a young staff sergeant with steady pay, single mom, no child support, paying for daycare and textbooks because I was finishing my degree at night. Somehow, I still ended up pulling from my military advance pay just to make sure my father could breathe for another month. That was the moment the pattern started. I didn't recognize it then, but patterns never announce themselves. They slip in quietly, disguised as duty. Every time my mother called afterward, the tone wasn't, "Can you help?" It was, "Here's the bill. Rent, utilities, insulin, groceries, gas." The first few years I told myself it was temporary. They were having a tough stretch. Roy couldn't work because of his heart. Denise's grocery store shifts got cut. I told myself I was lucky to have a career with stability, a career that paid enough to keep them afloat. But nothing changed. Not for them anyway. For Janice, it was even easier. She drifted from job to job, each one ending mysteriously with, "They didn't appreciate me," or "They had it out for me," or my personal favorite, "I'm too creative for a regular job." She'd come over with some wild idea every other month. Dog bakery, vegan meal prep, yoga studio but with candles lit, only at specific, spiritual angles. The kind of stuff she Googled at 2 a.m. after binge-watching shows where entrepreneurs make millions selling air in a box. The candle shop was the first time she seemed serious. She showed up at my apartment in Colorado with a binder full of color-coded tabs like she'd actually put thought into it. She talked about tourism traffic in Old River District, boutique shops doing well, scented candles trending online. She knew the numbers, down to what she claimed she could earn in a week. That alone made me stop long enough to listen. "You'd be investing in something real this time," she told me, like I was her personal venture capitalist. The The problem was, I wanted to believe her. I wanted her to have something that tethered her to real life instead of bouncing between fantasies. And I wanted Mara to grow up with at least one relative who didn't constantly explode into chaos. The shop needed $65,000 to launch. Janice didn't have a dime. My parents barely had enough for Roy's meds. The only person who could do anything was me. And when someone's been relying on you long enough, the line between helping and enabling gets smudged until you can't tell which one you're doing. I spoke with Frontier Veterans Credit Union, used the Jeep as collateral, read through every clause of the loan twice. The officer asked me the same question he asked everyone who co-signed for a family member. Are you prepared to take the financial hit if this fails? I said yes. In hindsight, that should have been the red flag. If someone asks you whether you're ready for disaster before you even sign the paperwork, the universe is trying to warn you. But I had spent years being the dependable one, the stable one, the one who fixed things. I told myself it would work, that if I kept pushing, maybe Janice would finally push too. For the first 6 months, it seemed like I'd made the right call. She sent me weekly updates. Pictures of handmade candles in glass jars. Video tours of the studio. Customers posing with shopping bags. Tourists tagging the shop in stories. Every time she made a sale, she acted like she'd discovered fire. Then the updates slowed. Then they stopped. I'd call, and she'd say she was busy. I'd ask for receipts, and she'd say she'd send them. I'd check the loan schedule, and the payments got later and later until 1 month there wasn't a payment at all. When I confronted her, she blamed the economy. Supply chain? Competition. Mercury retrograde. Anything but herself. Meanwhile, my parents' bills hit my account like clockwork. No thanks, no apologies, just the expectation that I'd stay in my lane as their personal financial support line. The longer I stared at those 8 years of transactions on my phone that morning, the more it felt like I was looking at someone else's life. Someone who said yes too often. Someone who kept giving long after she stopped receiving anything back. Someone who forgot she was allowed to stop. I locked my phone and set it down on the counter. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that let your mind settle for the first time in too long. I walked into the hallway and knocked gently on Mara's door. She opened it a crack, enough for me to see the broken box on her desk and the wood shavings scattered like she'd already started thinking about repairs. "You hungry?" I asked. She nodded. We cooked eggs together. Simple, warm, normal. She ate without saying much, but her shoulders weren't as tense as the night before. Kids have a way of healing faster than adults, not because they're stronger, but because they haven't learned the habit of pretending everything is fine. I rinsed the dishes. Mara dried them. The morning sunlight came through the window and hit the counter in a warm line. There was no dramatic moment, no big speech, no emotional explosion, just a quiet decision settling deeper into place, the kind that doesn't need repeating or explaining. And I didn't second-guess it for a second. The smell of eggs still lingered in the kitchen when I sat down at my laptop and opened the folder where I'd kept every document tied to Janice's candle shop. I hadn't looked at it in months. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was in there: receipts, loan agreements, lease paperwork, supply orders, all the things I had organized for her because chaos was her default setting. The folder opened like a time capsule of every bad decision I had helped cushion. I clicked through the early months first, mostly because they were the only ones that didn't make my blood pressure spike. Pictures of the shop before the grand opening. Shelves lined with candles in clear jars, each labeled with her handwriting, though I later learned a high school intern had written half of them. A wall of faux greenery she bragged about for weeks. A short video where she walked through the space, talking about burning down the competition, like she had invented the concept of candles. Her first few customer reviews were glowing. People loved the scents, especially one she called Desert Rain, a name she stole from a Pinterest board, but fine. I remember feeling proud of her in that moment. I remember thinking maybe this time she'd finally found something she could stick to. The illusion didn't last. The first sign came in the form of a late payment notification. Nothing dramatic, just a small red banner in my inbox, then the second, then a third, and that one came with a warning. I called her immediately, and she answered on the third try, voice half asleep even though it was 2 p.m. "It's slow this month," she said. "You know how tourism is." It wasn't slow. I checked the district's foot traffic stats. Tourism was doing fine. Janice wasn't. The more I dug, the more the cracks showed. Her inventory orders didn't match her supposed sales. Her bank statements looked like a roller coaster. One day she'd spend $6 on materials, the next she'd drop $200 at a brunch spot that didn't even bother pretending to be affordable. I drove down to Old River District with Mara one Saturday after a morning soccer scrimmage. The shop was dark, door locked, lights off. The sign out front still said open, which felt fitting in the same way a broken fire alarm feels fitting in a house full of smokers. I called Janice. She answered immediately that time, which should have been my first clue. "I'm on my lunch break," she said. "You're in Tucson," I replied. There was a long pause, the kind where you can hear the other person scrambling to build a story they should have prepared earlier. "I had to step out," she finally said. "I've been working all morning. I needed a break. You closed the shop in the middle of the day." Another pause. "Don't start with me, Lydia. Not today." I know. That was her go-to line anytime she got caught. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "You're right." Just a warning to back off because she didn't want to deal with reality. A week later, one of her part-timers messaged me on Facebook. "I quit," the message read. "She didn't pay me for 2 weeks, and she keeps showing up late." I didn't even know the girl. I didn't know her name. I only knew she was 17 and more responsible than Janice had ever been. The next time I pulled the shop's listings on Yelp, the shiny 5-star average had nosedived. Customers complained about sloppy labels, inconsistent scents, candles that burned unevenly, rude front counter service. And because the universe loves patterns, every time Janice hit a rough patch, she coped by spending money she didn't have. One night, after a 14-hour shift in operations at Fort Westlake, I sat on my couch scrolling half-heartedly through social media. That's when I saw her Instagram story. Janice clinking glasses at some rooftop lounge in Las Vegas with a caption that read, "Creative break, self-care matters." Self-care on whose dime? I checked her credit card statement the next morning. She had used the business account for the entire trip. Airfare, meals, drinks, hotel, even a new outfit from a boutique. Not a single purchase had anything to do with candles. I called her right away. She declined my call. I called again, declined again. I texted her. "We need to talk. Now." She responded 4 hours later with a selfie of her in oversized sunglasses and a message that read, "Relax. I needed this." The loan didn't care whether she needed it. The creditors didn't care. The landlord definitely didn't care. I drove down to Old River District again, this time alone. When I arrived, the shop's front door was open, but the air smelled like burnt wax and stress. Boxes were stacked everywhere, half of them empty, half of them filled with unsellable leftovers. The shelves looked bare, the floor hadn't been mopped in weeks, and Janice sat behind the counter looking like someone who'd discovered responsibility for the first time and decided she wanted a refund. "You can't just show up," she said without looking up. "It's my loan," I replied. She slammed her pen down. "You think I don't know that? You think I'm not trying?" I looked around. The place didn't look like trying. It looked like surrender disguised as effort. "You're not paying the loan. You're not paying the employees. You're not paying the rent." She leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "Maybe if you gave me more time." "More time?" I said. "You had months. You said you had a plan." "I do have a plan," she fired back. "It's just hard when you're under pressure. You don't get it." I laughed. I didn't mean to, but it came out sharp. "Janice, I work 12-hour days managing logistics for hundreds of soldiers. I get pressure." That set her off. She stood up and started pacing, ranting about how I thought I was better than everyone, how I always held the army over their heads, how I liked playing the hero. Every sentence sounded like she was reading from a script she'd written years ago and never updated. When she finally stopped, she looked at me with eyes that didn't see a sister. She saw a wallet. "You owe me," she said quietly. "We're family." There it was again, the word that never meant what it should have. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't bother explaining anything. I just walked past her, stepped outside, and stood on the sidewalk long enough for the afternoon breeze to cool my skin. Families can disappoint you in 1,000 different ways, But it's only when they start treating your effort like currency they're entitled to that you finally see the whole picture. I left the shop that day knowing something had shifted, even if the final snap hadn't happened yet. And once a shift starts, it doesn't shift back. The wind coming off Old River District still clung to my clothes when I unlocked the front door of our house, and the weight of that last conversation with Janice stayed with me like dust that wouldn't shake off. Mara looked up from the living room floor where she was sanding a new piece of wood, a small pile of shavings gathered around her knees. She didn't ask how things went. She didn't need to. Kids know more than we give them credit for, especially when the adults around them start showing cracks. I changed into a fresh shirt, sat down at the kitchen counter, and opened my phone again. The candle shop photos, the Vegas trip, the late payments, they all sat in the same place they had sat in my mind for months. But after the birthday party, the weight of them didn't feel optional anymore. The folder wasn't just evidence of a failing business. It was a timeline of my own denial. My phone buzzed. The family group chat lit up with messages. Not concern about Mara, not apologies, not even questions, just noise. Janice says you embarrassed her. That box wasn't that special. You overreacted. Why are you making drama? 8 years of support, and the one time I enforced a boundary, suddenly I was the villain. It didn't even sting this time. It just confirmed what I already knew. People who are used to you giving don't know what to do when you stop. I silenced the thread and set my phone down. Mara peeked over from the living room. Want to see something? I walked over and sat beside her on the carpet. She held up the piece she'd been carving. It was a small panel, simple lines shaping the start of a flower. Her hands were steady, calmer than I expected after what happened. It's not the box, she said, but I want to finish something good today. I felt something settle in my chest, not pride, not sadness, something closer to resolve. If she could keep building despite the mess around her, then I could too. Later that night, after she went to bed, I sat on the couch and opened the banking app again. I scrolled through every autopay connected to my account. My parents' rent, their electricity, their water, their internet, their gas. Several subscriptions I didn't recognize, probably signed up for during one of their "we need this to stay connected with the family" phases. Each line felt like a small tether pulling at me. Each click of the disable button felt like a thread snapping. As I went through it, the house stayed still. The living room lamp cast a warm circle onto the couch, and the only sound was the soft tap of my thumb confirming cancellations one by one. When I reached the last one, my parents' rent, I hovered for a second. Not because I doubted the decision, because 8 years of habit doesn't disappear without at least acknowledging the shift. Then I pressed disable. A short confirmation popped up, and the line disappeared from the list. There was no dramatic music, no lightning bolt, just the clean silence of a financial umbilical cord finally being cut. The next morning I woke up before my alarm, the way I usually did when something heavy sat on my mind. My uniform hung on the door where I'd left it. I slipped it on, tied my boots, and checked my bun in the mirror. The army had given me plenty of discipline, but it wasn't until that morning that I realized boundaries required the same precision. On my way out, I glanced at Mara's room. The cracked box sat on her desk, glued back together, the hinge still bent but holding. She had lined up her tools for the day, like a quiet protest against the way things had unfolded. When I got to the operations office at Fort Westlake, the building smelled like fresh coffee and printer toner, the unofficial cologne of military admin life. I walked straight to the S1 section paperwork folder under my arm. The sergeant behind the desk looked up and nodded. "Morning, ma'am. What can I do for you?" "I need to file documentation," I said. "Family-related situation. Potential spillover. The Army loves forms. The Army loves documentation even more. But when you work in a system that depends on structure, you learn to use that structure to your advantage." I handed over the photos, Jeep, broken box, screenshots. Not for drama, not for revenge, for record keeping. If anything escalated, there would be no question about who did what. The sergeant scanned everything in, tagged the file, and nodded. "We'll keep this on record, ma'am. End of 2-8. I thanked him and left, feeling lighter than I expected. Filing paperwork never solved a personal problem, but it did put a line between what was mine to handle and what wasn't. During lunch, I sat at an outdoor table near the training fields. scrolling through loan documents. Frontier Veterans Credit Union had already flagged Janice's account as overdue. They weren't playing games. Missed payments were missed payments. A Jeep was a Jeep. And banks didn't care about excuses. I called the credit officer I'd spoken with during the original loan signing. "This is Captain Kroll," I said. "I need to report a formal default." He confirmed the details, verified the collateral, and told me the repo team could be dispatched within 48 hours. "Do you want to notify the borrower?" he asked. "No," I said. "They'll figure it out when the truck gets there." The officer didn't react. Military credit unions dealt with enough messy family loans that my situation probably barely made the top 30 of the week. That evening, after dinner, Mara and I sat in the living room again. She was working on another wooden panel, this one cleaner, sharper. Like she was pouring every ounce of focus into sanding the edges smooth. My phone buzzed. Janice. I let it go to voicemail. She called again and again, then my parents, then Janice again. The voicemail transcriptions popped up on my screen like a fast-moving billboard of entitlement. "You can't do this. You're overreacting. You need to call the bank back. You're ruining everything." Not one message asked how Mara was doing. Not one mentioned the box. Not one even attempted an apology. I put the phone face down and watched as Mara blew sawdust off her piece, creating a soft cloud that drifted through the lamplight. "What are you making now?" I asked. "A lid," she said. "For a new box. Another gift?" "No," she said, "this one's for me." Something about that answer hit deeper than she realized. The house settled around us, warm and steady. The calls eventually stopped. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It felt earned. It felt overdue. I leaned back on the couch, listening to the soft scrape of Mara's sandpaper, and the simple rhythm of her work filled the room like a reminder that not everything about life needed to be tangled up in obligation. And nothing about the day felt like it required permission from anyone else. The repo truck pulled into Old River District just as the morning heat started to rise off the sidewalks, the kind that makes the air shimmer like a warning. I was nowhere near the shop when it happened, but the credit union officer sent me the confirmed dispatch time the night before, and I didn't need a front row seat to know exactly how it would play out. Repo teams don't wait, they don't negotiate, and they don't ask permission. They show up, hook the vehicle, and leave before most people even finish their morning coffee. I was sitting in the operations office at Fort Westlake, finishing a report about supply chain delays for the training battalion, when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a video notification, not from Janice, but from one of her neighbors in the district, who apparently thought recording chaos counted as community service. The clip opened with the familiar red Jeep parked crookedly in front of the shop. Janice stood 10 feet away, barefoot on the pavement like she'd run outside without thinking, hair in a knot that looked like regret held together with a hair tie. The repo team was already backing up, the truck beeping steadily as they aligned the lift. Janice shrieked something unintelligible, waving her arms as if sheer panic could stop a legally binding contract. The driver didn't react. He'd heard every version of this meltdown in every zip code in the state. He lowered the metal arm, slid it under the back tires, and hooked the straps in place with the kind of efficiency that only comes from doing the same job hundreds of times. The Jeep tilted upward. Janice lunged forward like she was going to throw herself on the hood. The second repo guy stepped between them with a simple raised palm, the universal sign of, "Don't make this worse for yourself." For a moment she froze, realizing she wasn't going to win a shoving match with two men whose entire job revolved around people losing their cars. The Jeep lifted clean off the pavement. The camera panned left long enough to catch two tourists filming from across the street, probably thinking they'd stumbled onto the best free entertainment the district had seen all week. A moment later, the truck pulled away with the Jeep fully secured, Janice jogging behind it like she could chase down her financial reality. When the clip ended, I set my phone down and kept typing my report like nothing had happened. Maybe that sounds cold, but enabling someone for 8 years takes a lot more out of you than watching consequences finally show up. A few minutes later, my phone lit up again, this time with a string of messages from the family group chat. "Did you do this? You're out of control. You're acting like the military owns you. You need to fix this now." I turned the screen over on my desk and kept working. My section chief walked by, gave me a nod, and set a stack of updated logistics schedules next to my elbow. He didn't need to know what was happening. My personal life didn't bleed into my work, not anymore. By noon, Janice switched from texting to calling. Then she switched from calling to sending voice messages. The first one sounded furious, the second one somehow more furious, and by the seventh, she'd hit the stage where anger folds in on itself and turns into dramatic victimhood. You ruined everything. You always thought you were better than me. You're jealous of my shop. And my personal favorite, I'm reporting you to someone. I don't know who, but someone. She said it like she expected me to drop to my knees and beg to know which imaginary authority she meant. I didn't respond to any of it. After work, I picked up Mara from school and drove to a small diner on the edge of town she liked. She ordered pancakes for dinner, because she was 12 and pancakes at 6 p.m. was apparently a personality trait. She talked about the woodworking project her teacher assigned build something meaningful. She had already started sketching ideas on a napkin, her pencil tapping faster than her brain could catch up. I liked seeing her focus on things she cared about. Kids shouldn't carry the weight of adult dysfunction, especially not when they had the talent and drive to build something better. She explained her design plans while I listened, tasting the quiet pride in her voice more than the food in front of me. Halfway through her explanation, my phone buzzed again. I didn't even look. Whatever it was could wait. What mattered was the kid sitting across from me, drawing spirals and joints and measurements while swinging her legs under the booth. When we got home, she went straight to her tools, and I went straight to the kitchen to pour a glass of water, the simple kind of reset that keeps you from carrying stress through every room of the house. My phone buzzed again. Same number, same desperation. This time I opened it, not to respond, but because I wanted to see how deep she'd gone into denial. The latest message read, "You can't leave me hanging like this. You're supposed to help family." The words weren't surprising. Entitlement rarely evolves. It just gets louder. I set the phone down again and leaned against the counter, letting my eyes focus on the small sounds of the house. Mara sanding wood, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tap of airflow through the vents. For once, nothing in the rhythm of our home was being disrupted by someone else's chaos. The absence of it felt better than any apology I would never get. Later that evening, after Mara showered and the house quieted into its nightly routine, I sat on the couch again with my laptop. I pulled up the shop's lease agreement. The unpaid balance had already triggered the landlord's cycle of notices. Once the Jeep was gone, Janice wasn't going to find the money to fix anything. Her business wasn't just struggling, it was done. I scrolled through old text messages from her, the ones where she promised she'd make payments on time, where she swore she had plans, where she told me over and over she wouldn't let me down. None of them came with action. None of them held weight. My phone buzzed one more time, this time from the credit union officer confirming that the vehicle had been officially processed and moved to the holding lot. Auction date pending. The deficiency balance would be issued soon. Everything was moving exactly the way it was designed to move. I closed the laptop, turned off the lamp, and let the room settle into the comfortable dark. The house didn't feel tense or uncertain. It felt grounded, the way it always did when responsibility finally slid back into the hands where it belonged. And for the first time in a long time, nothing felt out of place. The evening air had that dry Arizona bite when I stepped onto the porch the next morning, coffee mug warming my hands as the sun started pushing over the rooftops. I hadn't slept much, but it wasn't the restless kind, more like my mind had been clearing out long-standing clutter, tossing things into the mental trash bin that should have been emptied years ago. Inside, Mara was packing her lunch for school, humming under her breath. The kid has a way of staying steady even when life tries to shake the floorboards loose. I drove her in, wished her a good day, then headed toward Fort Westlake, the routine almost comforting. But routine never lasts long in a family built on emotional booby traps. My phone lit up halfway through the drive, my mother calling. Not a text, not a voicemail, an actual call. She only did that when she wanted something big or dramatic. I answered with a flat, "Yeah?" She skipped hello. "Your sister is hysterical." I didn't sigh. I didn't roll my eyes. I just kept driving. "She says you let the bank steal her Jeep," my mother continued, voice sharpened by the tone she used when she wanted me to feel guilty. "She can't open the shop without it." "The shop wasn't open, even with it," I said. Silence. The offended kind. "You think you're better than us," she snapped. "Marching around in your uniform acting like you're some big deal. Family helps family." I switched lanes. Family doesn't get to set things on fire and then demand I bring the water. You're ungrateful, she said. After everything we've done for you. That line nearly made me laugh. Everything they had done? 8 years of rent, utilities, groceries, meds. My signature was on every bill keeping their roof up. I kept my tone level. I'm not paying your rent anymore. Her inhale was sharp, the kind people do when they're about to perform an outrage monologue. You can't do that, she hissed. Your father needs his insulin. He has insurance. Not enough. That's between you two. Not between you and my bank account. You're abandoning your own parents, she snapped. What kind of daughter does that? One who's spent 8 years doing more than enough. She sputtered, searching for a new angle. We raised you. We did our best. You raised me to survive you, I said simply. She gasped, like I'd shot her. I ended the call. She called again. I declined. She sent a barrage of texts, each message more dramatic than the last. I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat. At work, I briefed a training schedule, coordinated transportation for an incoming group of recruits, and signed off on a supply order. My coworkers had no idea a family meltdown was happening in the background, and I liked it that way. The military might throw chaos at me, but at least it was the organized kind. During lunch, I checked my phone. 34 unread messages. The group chat looked like someone had shaken a box of emotional popcorn. You can't abandon your parents. Your sister is having a mental breakdown. Be the bigger person. You owe this family. One cousin chimed in with, stealing a Jeep is illegal. I blocked him. Problem solved. When I walked out of the base later that afternoon, 2 military cops were standing near the exit gate, talking to the security guards, and for one crazy second I thought, please don't let this be connected to my family. It wasn't. Thankfully. But that instinct? It said everything about how far the drama had spiraled. I picked up Mara, and we drove home. She asked about her woodworking project, chatted about school, and didn't mention Janice or my parents at all. She was giving me space the way I always gave her space when she needed it. That's the thing about raising a child with kindness, they learn to reflect it instead of weaponize it. When we got home, I opened the mailbox expecting bills or flyers. Instead, I found a crumpled envelope with my mother's shaky handwriting. Inside was one sentence scribbled in red pen. You will regret this. Subtle. Real subtle. I tossed it in the trash, washed my hands, and helped Mara prep dinner. The evening settled into small, quiet routines, the kind that make a home feel safe even when outside noise tries to claw its way in. We ate, cleaned up, and she worked on her new box design while I sat nearby handling Army emails. Then, around 9, my doorbell rang. My neighborhood is quiet. People don't show up unannounced unless something is wrong. My body tightened before my mind even finished processing the sound. I checked the Ring camera feed. There they were, Roy and Denise. My father leaning heavily on his cane. My mother clutching a laminated sign like she was a protester outside a grocery store. The sign read, Ungrateful Daughter. Of course it did. I opened the front door halfway. You need to leave. My mother shoved the sign higher. Everyone needs to know what kind of daughter you are. This is a residential neighborhood, I said. You can't be here causing a disturbance. We're not leaving until you fix what you broke, she declared, and behind her my father muttered, You owe us, like it was a family motto. Before I replied, a neighbor 3 houses down stepped outside with his dog. He looked over, saw the sign, and froze. I could practically see him deciding whether to intervene or pretend he hadn't seen anything. I stepped onto the porch just enough for my voice to carry without raising it. I'm asking both of you to leave. Right now. No, my mother snapped. We raised you. We sacrificed for you. You can't slam the door in our faces. You're standing on my property with a sign calling me ungrateful, I said. That's not a conversation. That's harassment. We're not leaving, she repeated. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I didn't debate logic with people allergic to it. I tapped the screen on my phone. Dispatching a trespass call, I said. My mother stiffened. You wouldn't dare. You're trespassing, I replied. You don't get to decide what I dare. Ode. Then I stepped inside and closed the door. Not slamming, not dramatic, just firm enough to end the discussion. Through the ring feed, I watched them stand there long enough for awkwardness to kick in. My father shifted his weight. My mother looked around like she expected applause. When they realized nobody cared, they finally shuffled toward their old Corolla and drove off without another knock. Inside, Mara looked up from the dining table. "Are they gone?" "Yeah," I said. "They're gone. All lick." She nodded once and returned to sanding the box lid, her movements precise, unbothered. Kids adapt fast when adults stop letting dysfunction set the tone. Later that night, while I locked up the house and checked the windows, the quiet settled again. Not fragile, not temporary, just earned. Not one part of me second-guessed the boundaries I'd set. Not one part of me questioned the distance growing between us. The only thing that felt surprising was how long I had waited to do it at all. The house had settled into its usual nighttime rhythm by the time I finished locking up Mara's desk lamp, glowing faintly under her door, the steady hum of the air conditioning pushing through the vents, and the kind of silence that makes you realize how loud your family has been for far too long. I double-checked the smart lock, tapped the security panel, and turned off the hallway light before heading to my room. My boots were still by the door from earlier, dust clinging to the laces like proof of the day I'd had. Sleep came fast, the kind that hits you when your mind is finally done negotiating with itself. But sometime after midnight, something pulled me straight out of it, not a crash, not a scream, but the distinct, sharp pound of someone hammering their fist against the front door. 3 fast hits, 1 long one. My pulse snapped awake faster than the rest of me. I swung out of bed, feet hitting the floor before my brain caught up. Through the wall, I heard Mara's lamp click on and the scuff of her feet against the carpet. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. I reached for my phone and opened the ring feed. Janice filled the screen. She stood on my porch, swaying slightly, hair disheveled, mascara smeared under her eyes like she'd wiped her face with the back of her hand too many times. A half-empty bottle dangled from her fingers, swinging with every breath she took. She pounded the door again, louder this time, the sound echoing through the entire house. "Open up!" she shouted. "I know you're awake!" She didn't look drunk. She looked volatile. I moved down the hallway quietly, stopping outside Mara's room. She cracked the door open just enough for me to see her face. Eyes wide. Not panicked, but alert in the way kids get when they've already learned too much about danger. "Closet," I whispered. She nodded, slipped inside, and pulled the door shut. I made my way to the living room, every sense sharpened the way they did during training drills at Fort Westlake. The pounding grew louder, more unhinged. She kicked the bottom of the door hard enough that I felt the frame shudder under my feet. "You ruined my life," she yelled. "You think you can just walk away? You think you're better than me?" Another hit. Another kick. The porch light cast her shadow across the floor, like something clawing at the house. My heartbeat didn't spike. I'd learned how to keep that in check, but the muscles along my shoulders tightened with the kind of readiness the Army drills into you until it becomes instinct. I dialed 911 and lowered my voice. "This is Captain Lydia Crowell. I have an intoxicated individual attempting to force entry into my home. Address is..." The dispatcher didn't waste time. "Are you and anyone else inside in a safe location?" "Yes. The door's locked. Security camera is recording. Units are on the way. Do not engage." Outside, Janice slammed the bottle against the door, the thud dull but heavy enough to make the hinges tremble. Then she leaned her forehead against the wood and let out a long, broken sound. "You owe me," she muttered. "You owe this family." Blue and red lights washed across the living room before she finished the sentence. She turned, blinking stupidly into the glare as 2 patrol cars rolled to a stop at the curb. Officers stepped out, hands near their belts but not drawn, the way they approach someone who might turn unpredictable at any second. "Ma'am, step away from the door," one called firmly. Janice staggered back, arms flailing. "She stole from me, she stole my car." "Ma'am," the officer repeated, "step away from the door and keep your hands visible." She didn't comply. Instead, she lifted the bottle like some sloppy battle flag and pointed it at the officers. "She thinks she's hot stuff because she's in the Army. She thinks she's better than us." I watched through the feed as 2 officers moved in fast, each grabbing an arm. She twisted violently, trying to wrench free, screaming my name like it was an accusation, and a prayer rolled into one. "Let go. She ruined everything. She's the reason. Her words shattered into incoherent yelling as they cuffed her. The bottle rolled off the porch, hitting the concrete with a hollow clink. One officer approached the door and knocked gently. "Ma'am?" I opened it enough to show my face and ID, without compromising the deadbolt. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "My daughter is inside as well. We're safe." He nodded, exhaling the kind of breath cops let out when a call goes better than expected. "We're taking her in for disorderly conduct and attempted forced entry. If you want to file for a protective order tomorrow, the magistrate office opens at 7. "Thank you," I said. He gave a reassuring nod and walked back to the patrol car. Janice sat in the back seat, head bowed, hair falling across her face. She wasn't crying. She wasn't angry. She looked empty in a way that wasn't my responsibility to fix, not anymore. When the cars pulled away, the street fell quiet again. Still, almost eerily normal. I closed the door, slid the deadbolt back into place, and walked down the hall. Mara opened her closet door slowly, stepping out with her blanket pulled around her shoulders. "Is she gone?" she asked. "Yes." She nodded once, the same steady, grounded way she'd handled everything in the last few months. I tucked her in again, sat on the edge of the bed until her breathing slowed, then slipped out and turned off the light. The house felt different when I walked back to the living room. Not lighter, not heavier, just clearer, like the air had shifted in a way that couldn't shift back. I replayed the footage once more, not because I needed to see it again, but because documenting reality had become second nature. I uploaded the video to a secured drive, flagged the timestamp, and typed a short label for the Army record I had started earlier. Then I shut down the screen and let the room fall into a steady, uncomplicated quiet. Nothing in the house felt uncertain. Nothing in me felt unsure. Boundaries weren't theoretical anymore. They were enforced, documented, and real. In a way my family had never taken seriously until the moment blue lights washed across my lawn. The morning after Janice was arrested rolled in quietly, the way mornings do when the chaos is outside the house instead of inside it. I brewed coffee while the sun pushed through the kitchen window in thin, steady lines. Mara sat at the counter working on the new box. She'd been designing cleaner joints, sharper edges, something sturdier than the one Janice shattered. She didn't ask about the night before. She didn't need to. Kids read tension better than adults read weather. After dropping her off at school, I drove straight to the magistrate's office. Filing the protective order took half an hour of form, an explanation, a video copy from the Ring camera. The clerk stamped everything without emotion. I signed my name with a steadiness I didn't expect, the kind that comes when you finally stop giving people permission to hurt you. When the order was approved, I tucked the papers into a manila folder and left the building without looking back. On the steps outside, my phone buzzed. A text from the landlord of Janice's shop. "We need to discuss the outstanding rent before we file for eviction." I typed, "Contact the tenant. I'm no longer financially involved." He called immediately. "Miss Crowell, Janice said you're the guarantor." "I'm the collateral holder," I corrected, "not the guarantor. The Jeep was repossessed. There's nothing left tying me to her lease." Silence. Then a resigned, "Understood." By noon, I received another message this time, from Frontier Veterans Credit Union. Auction completed. Vehicle sold for $21,500. Remaining balance to be pursued directly from borrower. I read the message twice, not out of surprise, but out of the strange satisfaction that comes from finally watching consequences catch up to someone who kept outrunning them using my legs. Meanwhile, my parents started escalating. A voicemail from my mother hit first. "You had your sister arrested. How dare you? She's your blood." A second voicemail followed. "This family is falling apart because of you." "How?" Then a third. "I hope you're happy." The guilt trips didn't sting anymore, they just sounded like recordings they'd memorized years ago. I played none of them past the first 3 seconds. Around mid-afternoon, my father left a message too. "You'll regret treating us this way. We're not done." I blocked him. The moment the block went through, the tiny vibration of my phone stopping a call attempt felt cleaner than any apology he never gave. At the office, I finished drafting the logistics memo for next month's training cycle. Nobody at Fort Westlake suspected anything about my personal life, not because I hid it, but because boundaries were something I finally decided to protect, like classified documents. After work, I drove to pick up Mara. She came out of the building smiling, backpack slung over one shoulder, sawdust clinging to her shirt from the woodworking room. She slid into the passenger seat and sighed happily. "Want to see what I finished?" she asked. "Absolutely." She held up the new box, unfinished but already beautiful. The lid fit perfectly. The joints were clean. She'd created something solid, the opposite of everything we'd left behind. "You're getting good," I said. She shrugged, pretending not to smile, even though her face absolutely did. On the drive home, she talked about a science project, a teacher she liked, a funny mishap in the lunchroom. None of it involved Janice. None of it revolved around my parents. For once, normal life existed without them orbiting overhead like a storm cloud. When we got home, the mailbox was stuffed. I pulled everything out and flipped through envelopes. Bills, flyers, a pre-approved credit card offer, and one envelope with handwriting I recognized instantly. My mother's. I opened it carefully, not because it mattered, but because I wanted to see how far they'd push. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper with a single sentence written in thick black marker. "You can't erase us." No greeting, no signature, just the kind of vague threat that would have rattled me years ago, back when I still cared what they thought. I dropped it in the bin, washed my hands, and let the trash lid close with a soft thump. Later that evening, Mara was on the floor of the living room with her tools out again, shaping another piece of wood. I sat at the dining table with my laptop open, checking emails, reviewing tasks for the next day. Just as I started to shut everything down, my phone buzzed with a new alert from the Ring camera. Someone was standing across the street. Motion detection captured a car parked at an angle under the street lamp, engine off. Inside, a figure sat too still for too long. The silhouette wasn't familiar, but the energy was wrong, staring, lingering, waiting. I zoomed in. The license plate was partially blocked by glare. The driver's face was shaded. But the shape, the slouch, the posture, the outline felt too familiar to ignore. I snapped a screenshot, cropped it, and texted it to the non-emergency line. "Suspicious vehicle, possible violation of protective order." The dispatcher replied, "Officers en route." I walked to the living room doorway. "Mara?" She looked up. "We're closing the blinds." "My." She stood, helped me pull each blind shut, and didn't ask questions. Not because she was scared, but because she trusted me enough not to need explanations. We waited 5 minutes before the patrol car arrived. When the officers flashed their lights, the parked car jolted into motion and sped off. Too fast, too familiar. One officer knocked on our door. "Ma'am, car was registered to a friend of Janice's," he said. "We'll file it as a possible violation." "Thank you," I replied. He nodded and left. Inside the house, the air shifted again, not tense, not anxious, but aware. Awareness is its own kind of quiet. I checked the locks again. All secure. I checked the windows. Tight. The house felt like a fortress, not because of fear, but because it finally had walls that kept the wrong people out. Mara settled back at her workstation, picking up her sandpaper where she left off. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Everything's handled," I said. She nodded and kept smoothing the wood grain, each stroke steady and sure. I sat on the couch, listening to the sound of her working, the hum of the AC, the soft clatter of tools, and for the first time in weeks, the noise outside our house, the drama, the threats, the fallout, felt far away, like a radio station losing signal. Whatever storm my family thought they could create, it couldn't get past my front door. Not anymore. The house settled into a predictable rhythm over the next few weeks. Mara working on her projects after school, me rotating between base duties and evening routines, and the outside noise slowly losing its grip on our lives. The calls had stopped. The late-night lurking had stopped. Even the mailbox drama eased up, replaced mostly with grocery flyers and utility bills. The quiet didn't feel temporary anymore. It felt earned. I didn't think much about my parents or Janice during that stretch, not because I forced myself not to, but because my mind finally had space for things that actually mattered. Mara and I cooked more dinners together. We took longer walks after sunset. I started going to the gym again instead of letting family stress eat up my evenings. My body felt steadier, my days more grounded. Then, One Saturday morning, something broke the pattern. I opened the front door to grab a package, and sitting beside it was a thin, wrinkled envelope with no return address. The handwriting on the front was messy, uneven, and too familiar, like someone who never learned to write without leaning hard on resentment. Janice. I didn't open it right away. I set it on the counter, poured myself coffee, and watched Mara sketch designs for a jewelry box she wanted to build next. She talked through options for hinges and joints, the kind of hyper-focused detail that reminded me she'd grown into her own person faster than most adults grow into honesty. Only after she went to the garage to measure wood did I finally pick up the envelope. Inside were 3 pages torn from a yellow legal pad. No greeting, no structure, just sentences collapsing into each other the way people do when they're desperate to rewrite the story before consequences finish landing. The first line, "You ruined everything. Predictable." The second, "I know I made mistakes, but you didn't have to go nuclear." Nuclear, her word for accountability. Then it shifted. She wrote about the shop failing, about losing the Jeep, about my parents moving from place to place because they couldn't make rent without me. She tried to turn circumstances into sympathy, but the tone kept slipping into accusation every few sentences, as if she couldn't decide whether to admit fault or blame me for not fixing what she broke. Then the final paragraph, the one she clearly hoped would hit the hardest. "Dad's health is getting worse. He could lose a foot. We don't have money for the specialist. If anything happens to him, that's on you. Family doesn't abandon family." End of teen. I stood in the kitchen reading the words twice, not because I doubted what they meant, but because I wanted to make sure I wasn't imagining the entitlement woven between every line. She wasn't asking for help. She was demanding a rewrite. A rewrite where none of them had drained my bank account for nearly a decade. A rewrite where my boundaries were cruelty. A rewrite where their choices were my responsibility. I folded the letter calmly, slid it back into the envelope, and tossed it in the trash under the coffee grounds from the day before. It didn't deserve a dramatic gesture. It deserved disposal simple, unceremonious, complete. Later that afternoon, while Mara and I were cleaning out the garage shelves, she found an old storage tote labeled "Family Stuff." Inside were photos, birthdays, camping trips, Thanksgiving dinners where we pretended everything was normal. But once you see the truth, old pictures stop being memories and start being evidence. Mara held up a photo of Janice holding her as a baby, smiling bright and carefree. "Did she used to be nice?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment, not the easy answer, but the honest one. "She used to be better at pretending," I said. Mara nodded like that made perfect sense, and she tucked the photo back into the pile without attaching emotion to it. That night, after she went to bed, I sat at the dining table and drafted a short message, not for my family, not for social media, but for myself. A line I wanted to keep clear in my mind. I am not responsible for saving people who set the fire and hand me the extinguisher. Writing it wasn't emotional, it was clarifying. The next morning, I checked my email and saw a new notification from the property manager of my parents' old rental. Final lockout completed. Tenants removed. Forwarding address requested. They listed a cheap motel across town, one of those month-to-month places with flickering signs and parking lot arguments at 2 a.m. The kind of place people end up when denial catches up faster than excuses can outrun it. I didn't visit, I didn't call, I didn't send anything. 2 days later, another envelope arrived, this one smaller, stamped, written in my father's handwriting. Inside, a bill from urgent care, and a sticky note that said, "Pay this. Haldur." I placed both in the shredder. The machine hummed, slicing paper into strips that fluttered into the bin like dry, confetti, quiet, controlled, final. Life kept going. Mara finished her new jewelry box and polished the inside with a soft cloth like she was preparing it for something important. I asked if she planned to give it to a friend or keep it for herself. She smiled slightly. "For me," she said. A small answer with big roots. At work, my commanding officer called me in not for trouble, but to tell me I'd been selected for a logistics leadership program, something I had been working toward quietly for months. He handed me the acceptance packet, and I felt a rare surge of pride that came from my own achievements, untouched by the weight of family obligation. Driving home that evening, the air smelled like dry sage and pavement warming under the sunset. I rolled the window down, letting the breeze cut through the last of the day's heat. Nothing felt unresolved or dangling. Everything was shifting into place exactly where it needed to be. When I pulled into our driveway, I noticed something on the welcome mat, a white postcard. No envelope, no handwriting on the front besides my name. I picked it up and flipped it over. One sentence. Sharp. Printed in plain block letters. We are no longer family. End co. The irony made me laugh, not loud, not mocking, just a single breath of disbelief at how neatly the universe sometimes ties loose ends together. I didn't keep the card. I didn't save it. I didn't frame it or respond or wonder. I dropped it into the kitchen trash with the same ease I dropped the letter. Then I washed my hands, turned to the stove, and started dinner. The house didn't feel emptier. It felt cleaner. The postcard was still on top of the trash the next morning when I walked into the kitchen, the block letters staring up at me like they expected a reaction stronger than indifference. I tied the bag, took it outside, and dropped it in the bin without a second thought. The air was cool, the kind of rare Arizona morning where the heat hadn't caught up yet, and everything felt strangely steady for a life that had been dragged through a blender just weeks earlier. Inside, Mara sat on the couch cross-legged, polishing the lid of her finished jewelry box. She ran the cloth over the grain in slow, focused movements, checking the corners like a professional. "That one looks good," I said. She smiled. "I want to enter it in the county fair." "You should." She held it up, proud and unbothered by the pieces of our family that had finally scattered where they belonged. Watching her handle her own world with this much calm made it easier to let go of the guilt I'd carried for years, guilt that wasn't mine in the first place. I loaded my bag and headed to Fort Westlake for another full day. The base bustled like usual soldiers jogging PT routes, officers crossing the quad with folders tucked under their arms. The faint metallic smell from the motor pool drifted across the breeze. Routine had a way of grounding everything. During a logistics meeting, my section chief passed me a printed memo. "Congrats," he said. "Your start date for the leadership program is confirmed." It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a surprise. But it settled deep in a way nothing else had lately. Something earned without being drained by anyone else's expectations. The email attached to the memo read, "Captain Crowell, your record reflects strong judgment under pressure. Continue that trajectory." You'd meant, under pressure. Funny how that made more sense outside the Army than inside it. That afternoon, during a break between briefings, I checked my phone. A distant cousin had sent a message. "Your parents got kicked out of the motel. They're staying in their car." No accusation. No request. Just information. I didn't reply. I didn't need to know more. If people burned every bridge except the one you were standing on, that didn't make you obligated. It made you targeted. And stepping away wasn't cruelty. It was survival. After work, I picked up Mara and we stopped by a hardware store to grab new clamps for her next project. She wandered through the aisles like she was in an art gallery, touching wood samples and comparing hinge sets like a craftsman twice her age. As we walked out, she slipped her hand into mine. "Mom? Yeah? Do we have to see them again?" Her voice wasn't scared, just curious. Practical, like she was asking if we needed milk. "No," I said. "We don't." She nodded once and squeezed my hand. On the drive home, the sky glowed orange across the horizon, spreading light over the desert in long streaks. Mara rolled down her window and let the wind push through her hair. She looked lighter. I felt lighter. Our little car felt like a world separate from every problem we had left behind. When we got home, I checked the front porch automatically, not for threats, just for packages. The neighborhood felt calm again. No lingering cars. No strangers sitting in parked vehicles after dark. No pounding on the door or signs waved on my lawn. The quiet wasn't fragile anymore. It had roots. After dinner, Mara went to the garage to start the frame for her next build. I sat at the dining table with a notebook, outlining updates for the leadership program and reviewing a few tasks for the week. Nothing dramatic, nothing chaotic, just everyday work. At some point, I realized we hadn't talked about Janice or my parents in days, maybe weeks. They'd become background noise, static behind a life that had moved forward without waiting for them to change. Later that night, Mara knocked softly on my bedroom door. She held the finished jewelry box in both hands, the wood polished smooth, the lid fitting perfectly. "Can you look?" she asked. I opened it carefully, running my fingers along the corners. It was beautiful, sharp, clean, intentional. "You did incredible," I said. Her smile flickered into something quieter. "I like making things that last." The simplicity of that sentence landed harder than she knew. She was building something real while the people who once pulled at us were collapsing into the consequences they'd always outrun. After she went to bed, I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of tea, letting the night settle around me. The street was calm. The porch light hummed quietly. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once, then nothing else. I thought about the letter Janice sent, the motel eviction, the medical bills, the threats, the years I spent bending myself into shapes they never appreciated. I thought about the version of myself who might have driven across town to check on them, the version who'd apologize just to keep the peace, the version who believed family obligation meant self-sacrifice. She didn't exist anymore. The woman standing on that porch had boundaries that didn't bend. She had a quiet house, a safe child, a career moving forward, and a life that didn't include being anyone's collateral damage. Peace wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even emotional. It was Mara's calm breathing drifting down the hallway. It was a locked door that stayed locked. It was a trash bin, filled with letters that no longer meant anything. It was a home that stayed steady, not because chaos gave up, but because we stopped letting it in. I finished my tea, turned off the porch light, and stepped inside. The door clicked shut with a soft, final certainty. Nothing felt missing. Nothing felt unfinished. Everything we needed was already here.